much as second a proposal, let alone discuss or adopt the measure to show support to the Wisconsin School Board Association's decision to remove themselves from the National School Board Association after their recent letter calling upon the federal government to investigate parents. This was an obvious attempt by the National Board to keep parents from learning about what their children are being taught. I can only assume now that all but one member of our La Crosse School Board feels the same way. Does the board not feel that parents have a right to be part of their children's education? That is what your silence on the matter said to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Our next speaker is Shannon McKinnon.
Hello, my name is Shannon McKinnon. I am from the La Crosse School District. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my public input. I'm not sure when the school board adopted the practice of engaging in religious indoctrination, as it is called according to the law, but it came to my attention at the last school board meeting when the board observed a moment of silence, and as it also did today, and it's been actually doing for, I don't know how long you guys have been doing it. By quoting your words, you said that this was being done to honor and celebrate the ancestral Ho-Chunk land and all sacred lands of indigenous peoples. This type of commemoration of a particular group of people, I think I'm too close, and in honoring of sacred land is called paying homage to a particular religious belief system. The word sacred, by definition, refers to veneration to a god and is used for religious purposes. By making these declarations at the school board meeting and then pausing to invoke a moment of silence, the school board is unlawfully compelling the school board and everyone present to partake in a religious ceremony. To advocate one religious or ethnic group over another is not only discrimination, but the law has stated that it can cause harm to its listeners who do not hold the same beliefs. For this reason, I would ask that the school board suspend such religious statements and look into this issue before repeating this practice. Now, however, if a citizen wishes to reflect upon their firmly held beliefs as defined in the United States Constitution during their allotted time in the public comment period, such as now, they are allowed to do so because they represent only themselves. But the board members, as a government entity, are not allowed to do this. For example, for this meeting, I would like to say a short invocation blessing the proceedings of this meeting. Dear Jesus, Father, God in heaven, tonight I ask that your Holy Spirit would join us in this meeting and give us your wisdom on how to best proceed with the duty of caring for the children of the La Crosse School District. I ask that you would give the board members the prudence they need in making the correct decisions for our children. I would also ask that you would protect the mind, heart, bodies, and souls of the children in the school district. In your name I pray, amen. And I can give this to you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Our next speaker is Schlicht.
My name is Schlicht, and I reside in the School District of La Crosse. Good evening, school board members. I am a junior at Central High School, a member of Student Senate, as well as a member of Leaders Igniting Transformation, among other things. Almost 2 months ago, I came here for the first time to talk about mental health struggles. Now I come back to insist that you prioritize mental health by investing in having mental health professionals in schools. According to youth.gov, studies have shown the value of developing comprehensive school mental health programs in helping students achieve academically and have access to experiences that build social skills, leadership, self-awareness, and caring connections to adults in their school and community. There is much empirical evidence that supports the success and effectiveness of having strong mental health supports in schools. It's only a matter of stepping up and taking action. After the previous school board meeting, I worked on reaching out to the members of my school. Students have shared their experiences with mental health crises, causing them to miss school, with consequences doled out to punish their absence rather than a voice of empathy and concern, trying to find the best ways to help them. Staff reached out to me saying that they had been advocating for mental health support in the schools for years with no success. Counselors have a lot of work on their plate and do not have the time to specifically deal with students' mental health crises. Students and staff want to have someone at school to help students, to connect with students, and to be a safe, approachable, guaranteed connection for students to have. The staff have expressed their hopes that the words of students would get across to the district and we could finally get support for mental health in schools. But so far, we haven't seen any progress. We understand that this is a process that should take careful consideration to find the best solution. But students are suffering every day, and we can't just sit by as mental health stressors continue to pile on. Again, I am asking you to please commit to funding mental health services in school. While there may be work at the district level, students aren't seeing the results of it, which means the current approach isn't working. We need licensed professionals in school, and I urge you to listen to student voices. Even with good intentions, without action, suffering becomes accepted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Carter Mandel.
My name is Carter Mandel, and I reside in the Crosse School District. As I said, my name is Carter Mandel, and I'm the Logan High School Fellow for Leaders Igniting Transformation, as well as the sophomore in the La Crosse District school system. I'm asking that you invest in more mental health counselors being present in the school district using the ESSER funding to assist with the mental health crisis within our schools. La Crosse students are in crisis. We have no mental health support from our schools due to counselors being overwhelmed by their current workload. We need help. I've already talked to you at a previous school board meeting. I stood here and told you about my experiences with depression and problems within the school. I urged you to invest in mental health services by using the funds from the ESSER funding, but that was ignored. My experiences were pushed aside to fund things like student success coaches that focus more on academics and the mental health of their own students. We love the student success coaches at our school, but they are not mental health counselors. I sat in this room and listened to you, the people that make decisions that directly affect my future, beat around the bush of the fact that success coaches are not mental health counselors. They are not a replacement, and they are not the solution. I have hoped that the school board would listen to us and sympathize with their students, and I still hope I am right that you can do the right thing. All we ask is that you provide services for us to be happy. I have friends that have hurt themselves, attempted to end their lives, and even worse. And if these students wanted to help, they would be put on a wait list to speak with their counselors because other people needed to switch a class. These counselors don't have enough time, and we need to provide other sources for them or other positions to help these students. And I tried to keep calm about this fact, but mental health isn't something we can fund later. Depression and mental illness don't wait for funding. They strike the students whenever they do, and those students need the ability to survive. The last time we were here, you listened and told us you would work on it. Nothing happened. I got letters and messages from school board members saying that they valued the students' feedback. Then you, the school board, didn't even listen. If you value my feedback, use it. The students' voice is yours to listen to, and we are here asking, pleading that you listen to us. Saying you want and then not using it isn't okay. Stop prioritizing things like a mobile classroom that only services a handful of preschool students, and start prioritizing things that affect hundreds of students in your district and hundreds of thousands nationwide. Get the students' mental health counselors whose sole priority is to help their students mentally. Listen to us, that is your job. And Lit, as well as us students here, are to make sure you do it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Porter Kulp.
My name is Porter Kulp, and I reside in La Crosse School District. I'm also a sophomore at Central High School. I'm here to ask that the school district allocate more funds towards students and teachers' mental health and well-being. Recently, there has been an overwhelming feeling of exhaustion and stress among both my fellow students and teachers. Everyone seems to be overwhelmed and struggling to cope with the adjustments to regular school and the challenges that come with it. My concerns are as follows. One, that students cannot be taught as well when their teachers and administrators are overworked and struggling throughout their weeks. They need support just as much as students. in order for school to be an uplifting place for all of us. My second concern is this. Many students are having difficulties adjusting to regular school after a year and a half of virtual education. This has led to increased bullying, harassment, and disruptive activity during school hours. I and many other students are worried that this will lead to a mass shooting or other acts of terrorism on the school. There have already been threats of attack towards both Central and Logan, and the primary motive behind that is bullying. Clearly, the current measures to promote mental health are not working, so students need to be able to talk with their counselors and social workers to deal with these feelings and events so that they do not cope in a way that is harmful to others. I try to go to school each day hoping for the best, but the optimistic, it can never happen here mentality, it only goes so far. With each student I see who is isolated and frustrated, I grow more concerned for our school's collective well-being. Every student at our schools needs help and support in their own way, and this is not being addressed well enough. While many courses of action could be taken to improve the mental health of students and staff, one immediate solution would be removing school counselors from lunch supervision duties. The lunch periods of the day take up roughly 2 hours, and this is time taken away from students helping students who need it most. I hope the school board considers this perspective and leads to more and better funding and support of our students. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Lisney. I know I got that one wrong. I did got it right? Oh, thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Ella Lisney. I reside in the school district of La Crosse. I am also a senior at Central High School, and I am here with the Central Student Senate as well as Leaders Igniting Transformation. Many of us are here tonight to address the lingering issue of student mental health. This past week, I had the privilege to join a group of students discussing mental health with administrators and school board members. Out of this meeting, many important concerns were discussed about mental health, such as the lack of knowledge of available resources, limits to the services available, and the stress of our faculty, which we as students notice. It's clear that the struggle of maintaining the mental well-being of students and staff in our district is a current and serious problem. Tonight, I ask that the school board looks for opportunities to communicate with students and with staff about available supports, as well as expand on those supports. For example, hiring available mental health professionals to be there for students in the buildings. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of student and staff relationships in our schools. When I am feeling stressed and not like myself, I can lean on my family and my friends to support me through tough situations in my life. I also am very fortunate to have a good relationship with my academic counselor. She is one of my most trusted adults in the building, but with over 250 other students that she also must get to know, it is hard for her to be there all the time. Also, despite the many available supports at our schools, many students do not have this support available to them at home and are not aware of these supports. There are many students at school who do not even know that they have a counselor. By placing an emphasis on mental health support and strengthening student and staff relationships, we can create a safe space for students to express themselves and be able to learn to their best capacity. Please continue to listen to our students and our staff and act on these important concerns about mental well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Our next speaker is Laura Lapp.
My name is Laura Lapp, and I reside in the school district of La Crosse. Hello and good evening. I'm a proud student at Central High School and an active member in my community. I really care about the people around me, and seeing how the past year and a half has affected everyone in different ways, including the struggle of mental health, has brought a pain like no other. The feeling of stress and anxiety pulsing through the school is felt by all. I've been a student of Central for 63 days. That's 63 days of growth, learning, and support I've gotten from staff, students, and friends. That's also 63 days of confusion, stress, and pain I've had to endure. In 63 days, I've not only learned so much from the curriculum, but also from myself and the support I need to graduate in 2025. In these 63 days, I've also learned about my teachers and really gotten close to them all. I've seen them struggle as this year progresses because of the changes that occurred like no other year. My teachers are struggling, and that doesn't stop them from giving me their all.
It takes one day to walk through the halls, sit in a desk, and breathe the tight air that lurks within Central's four walls, not 63. At 5:23 p.m., my science teacher was grading a lab that we did that morning. I was eating dinner with my family. At 7:36 p.m., I was watching a movie with my family. My math teacher was posting a video to help students who were confused that morning with the homework. At 9:54 p.m., my Spanish teacher was replying to an email I sent him at 8:43 p.m. because I was confused about the information we learned that day. I was not expecting a reply, as I was already getting ready for bed. Not one of those teachers, in my opinion, should have been working, but they were, because they don't stop when they go home. I'm not sure if you do, but they sure don't. I have seen the support my peers have asked for, the following hit that comes after finding out that counselors are too busy to help. The counselors are helping seniors graduate and fixing schedules to have time to listen and provide the needed support. The 4 counselors are a big part of the well-running of Central, but no time in their schedules to provide the support they know how to give. Teachers can only provide limited emotional support, as that is not their main role, whereas counselors are too overworked to see all the students who need help. Hiring another position to free up that time and to give students the support they need could do wonders for the school. The following years could change in such a positive way, and the changes that COVID has brought us is something no one could imagine. It's time for some positive change that Central could benefit from years from now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Our next speaker is Kaitlyn Adams.
Hello, my name is Kaitlyn Adams, and I reside in the area of La Crosse. I'm a student at Logan High School, and I attend as a sophomore. I'm currently participating in a lit organization only as a member. I'm here to ask for more mental health assistance in that department. I wanted to come here and share my personal experience. When I was a freshman at Logan High School, I experienced extreme racism from students in Minnesota on Snapchat. My best friend and I took it to the principal to at least seek an apology from the school of the students or straight from the students who were being racist towards me. I was told there would be a follow-up, but it never happened. I was struggling to figure out my identity, and it was a really hard time for me. I would have panic attacks every night, and I couldn't understand why was I the color I am. This shows that how the school doesn't know how to comfort a student or handle a situation compared to this. Another example is that a student teacher from Logan High School called a black student's hair nappy. That student was extremely comfortable, and if you're not sure, nappy is a derogatory term to describe black people's hair in a negative way. That same student refuses to enter that room with that substitute teacher because of what happened and what they said. The school needs a change, and we are demanding it now. The first time we asked, but now we are demanding. I hope you understand our struggles and our needs, and I hope you take into consideration and value our responses to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Our final speaker is Amber West.
I'm back. Hello, everyone. My name is Amber West. I reside in the La Crosse district. I'm here to ask that the school board and administration to listen to our scholars simply that have come today. One, it's taken a lot of bravery and time for them to come and speak up, especially on behalf of other school members and other classmates. However, I do ask that we allocate more funding to our students' mental health. As you can see, they are crying out for help. They're asking for someone to listen. I myself, as a non-school staff member, I'm doing my part by bringing them to the school board meeting. However, we need to see real results, and they need to see real results. They need relief expeditiously, to be honest. Presently, students are dealing with a multitude of things, like school shooting threats, the pandemic, and academic rigor with little to no room for breaks or coping skills, really. And these are issues that are simply too big to ignore any further, and it can become a matter of life and death. I know many of us know about the tragedy that happened to a UWL student recently. We don't want that to translate into our high school students. I'm here to ask board members to focus on our students' needs and continue to listen to them, as well as not focus on their own political gains. Please allocate more funding for mental health relief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move on to the superintendent's consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
Second.
The consent agenda is a mechanism that's used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. With a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Como, the items on the superintendent's consent agenda are approved as presented unless there is objection. Is there any objection from the board members? Hearing none, we will move on to the board consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
The motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Como. The items on the board consent agenda are approved as presented unless there is objection. Is there any objection from the board members? Hearing none, that is approved, and we will move on to the long-range facility plan survey presentation, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
Thank you, Dr. Jimenez. We have been engaged in a long-range facility planning, and in that process, we conducted a survey recently, and we have the person who helped us conduct that survey here today, and Bill Foster, and we're going to ask him to present on these results. I would let the folks in the audience know who spoke at the public comment. You are more than welcome to stick around. This next 20 minutes will be fascinating for you all, but you're also welcome to leave if you have other things to do. We understand that you're busy and have other obligations as well. All right, I'll turn it over to Bill Foster to communicate the results of our survey.
Well, great. Thanks for having me tonight. Can I take this off? So can you hear me? So my job is to take you through the community survey. I just looked at my calendar. I was here in 2012 and 2007. So I'm the same guy that was here before, if you remember me. But again, I'm the president of School Perceptions, and my job is to take you through what the survey said. There we go. If we can just scroll through it so everybody can see it on the second page. Again, we've done over 800 of these community surveys, primarily in Wisconsin, but throughout the Midwest. So we've done a few of these before. As far as your survey, it went out in, next slide please, in October and November. It looked like this. It was mailed to every household in the district. At the time of putting this report together, we had 4,664 survey responses, or 1,335 came back via paper. So people could take it online or via paper. That gave us a response rate of 16.4%, or a statistical margin of error of plus or minus 1.5%. So just out of my own curiosity, I said, I wonder how that compares to the previous surveys we've done. So in 2007, we had 3,147 responses. And then in 2012, we had 2,012. So if there's nothing, one good thing about pandemics apparently is people take surveys. At least we're learning that. So next slide, please. So who took our survey? We go to the age slide. When I look at this slide, I always go to the far right. I want to make sure that our seniors are well represented in the data, which they are. You're at 24%. I think our 2020 census has you a little over 20%, so our seniors are actually a little overrepresented in the data. Our 18 to 25-year-olds are a little underrepresented in the data, but when it comes to voting, our seniors tend to vote, our younger folks don't. So we think this is a very good representation from an age standpoint. Next slide. In which municipality do you reside? We had about 2/3 of our sample came from the city of La Crosse, and then we did have representation from all the other townships in the district. And I believe we checked, and the representation here is also very good. I don't think we have too many people in the town of Hamburg and Washington, maybe just a few folks, and I think we got them to take the survey. Next slide. Is your primary resident in the school district of La Crosse? Here we had 90% of our sample that said yes, 9% that said no, and then 1% that weren't sure where they live, which raises the question, who are these 9% of these folks that are taking our survey that don't live in our district? The answer really comes from two areas primarily. One is staff, so all staff were given the opportunity to participate, even if they don't live in the district. The other group might be parents who choose to open enroll their parents or their students into the district. In both those cases, we're going to remove those folks from the funding support question. So if you don't live here, you can't vote here. So you're gonna see the word resident pop up shortly. So you need to be a resident to be counted in on the financial support questions or questions like that. Next slide. So we had 803, or 17% of our sample came from employees of the district. Next slide. 43% of our sample, or just over 2,000 parents, took our survey. Next slide, please. And if you have school-age children, what grade levels do they apply? So we could cross-tab the data on this. We did not yet, but so we do have at least knowing where if they're elementary, middle school, or high school level. If you're a math person, you might say, well, why doesn't this add up to 100%? And the answer is you could have a child in all three levels, so it is more than 100%. All right, so when we put this report together, everything that was in the actual survey is in the report. So when the board scratches their head next month and said, what did that survey actually say? Well, it talked about the challenges you're having. So we can scroll through these, that the fact that you are in a declining enrollment situation, you have been for a while. I understand you continue to be last year and this year. So that's part of the challenge. Or that's actually the tax mill rate. And your mill rate's been declining along with your, and I guess that's the good news. And that does reduce the tax impact for a person in the district. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we're up to the enrollment situation, which is also declining and continues to decline. So back in 2014, you had, what was it, 6,700 students. Now you're around the 5,000, 5,600 level, or 6,200 level. Next slide. You also have outdated classrooms. Some of those classrooms are more than 80 years old. Next slide, please. And you've got a number of high school. You got 2 high schools and a number of additional schools. Next slide, please. And you've got aging buildings. So again, this was the information that was contained in the survey. Next slide, please. This is a graph that kind of compared you to other school districts and kind of showed that you've got more school districts and more schools in other districts your size. Next slide. So then we introduced the concept of right sizing. Next slide, please. Explain that would include closing some buildings, consolidating operations, and renovating the remaining buildings and schools. Next slide. And we get to a survey question. Would you support a long-range plan to right-size our district based on the actions above? So now we have all residents in blue, 71%. And now what we want to do is we want to look at 3 mutually exclusive subgroups. We want to look at staff first. Staff is in red. And they're at 69% saying, yes, we should explore this. Parents, they're in the green. They're at 66%. And then we get to our non-parent, non-staff group. And by the way, you can only be in one group. If you are a parent and a staff member, you're in the staff box. So everybody's in one of those 3 boxes to the right. And the most important group, at least in my mind, are what we call the purple people, the non-parent, non-staff. Why are they the most important? Because they represent the majority of your voters. So with a typical K-12 school district, probably 75% of your community neither work in the district nor have kids in the district. So as a board member, you might want to look and kind of always put a little more weighting in the purple group. But we've got 69, 66, and 71%. So a strong majority of all subgroups are supporting the district, pursuing a plan to right-size the district. So as a concept, this is testing very well. Next slide, please. Then we go to each of the school levels. At the middle school level, we've got 3 middle schools. Again, the background information that was in the survey. Let's go to the next slide. Would you support a plan to consolidate from 3 to 2 middle schools? Again, I like it when the data comes back and it's fairly conclusive, which it is here. So staff is at 81%. The parents are at 73%. And our purple people, our non-parent, non-staff, they're at 79%. So again, there is strong support. A majority of all subgroups are supporting this idea of moving from 3 to 2, which is maybe not a surprise because this is something you've kind of explored before. We go to the next level, which is the high school. This one potentially could be a little more contentious. So we've got currently 2 high schools. Again, when they were built, the current enrollment capacity, as well as some of the needs that were identified in the survey. We then go to the question, would you support the district exploring consolidating from 1 high school campus to 2? Here you're still a majority, not quite the strong majority, but really the other interesting to me is there's just all 3 groups, which are 3 separate groups, are all kind of aligned. So 55, 52, 56%, a majority of all subgroups will support this idea of exploring consolidating from 2 to 1. We do have another quarter, generally a quarter% or a quarter of the sampling of not only staff, parents, and non-parent, non-staff. They're saying, no, we don't want that. With another, generally, another quartile saying, I need some more information before I can decide. Okay, next slide. So there was a second part to the high school. If you were to do this, you could move to a model that would have just 1 high school, or you could explore something like that the West Bend School District does, where they have an east and west. They're in the same building, but when kids go to that school, and that's actually the district I live in, interestingly enough, there you can be an east kid or a west kid and still be in the same building. So that was another model that could be explored or pursued. We then asked the question, next slide, if the district consolidates to 1 school campus, what advice would you give? You could maintain 2 schools. You could create 1 consolidated high school, and then you've got some folks that would support either option. And again, across the board, each subgroup is very similar to what they're saying. So what I would say, if you looked at creating 1 plus the folks who would support either, you could argue that a majority of all subgroups would support creating a consolidated high school. And then another, again, that same 25 up to 30% are saying I need some more information. So obviously this is a new concept that most people just saw for the first time, but we've got pretty clear data here across the board. Then we go to the elementary level. And again, the background information that was in the survey in terms of the number of elementaries that are currently maintained, as well as some of the challenges and outstanding maintenance that will need to be addressed at some point. We then go to the question, would you support a plan to reduce the number of elementary schools? Again, here we're jumped back up to the 73, 65, 70%. A strong majority of all subgroups are saying, yes, we need to reduce the number of elementary schools. And this is really against the background that as your enrollment declining, your funding is decreasing, which is going to create a deficit, an operating deficit, and this is one way to save some money. So I think people are beginning to understand that and are in concept supporting this idea. Next slide. And then we go to overall satisfaction. These are just some questions that we're asking. Here's a little different scale. How are we doing in each of the following areas? You could be great, good, fair, or poor. So if everyone said you're doing great, you'd be a 4. If everyone said you're doing poor, you'd be a 1. And then we also shared the percentile in terms of the number of people who either said great or good. And you can see generally delivering a high-quality education was the best, and building pride, managing funds appropriately, that was your lowest, which is typical, with all the districts we work with, that's typically tests the lowest. And I think the last one, and then we broke that out into each of the subgroups so you could see kind of how it varies from subgroups to subgroup. And the last slide is kind of an overall satisfaction, or what it says is on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend the district to a friend or family member? Our experience is the folks who are really neutral or below, they tend not, they're not happy about something. That will also correlate to not supporting a referendum. So that's kind of, there's a very, very high correlation between overall satisfaction and referendum support. But you ended up at a 6.98, which is actually pretty good. And I think that's the last slide. There you go. So questions on the survey, questions on the data?
Any questions? Yep.
Open-ended sections, right?
Mhm.
Do we like code that qualitative data to understand, like, in particular, looking at the one high school proposal, trying to find it. There's quite a few people that need more info, and I think the staff one at 24% was interesting, considering I would think that they would be in on some of these discussions. So I'm just curious, like, next steps, what are we offering to the community to give them more information so they can support this if this was the path that we went down?
First, I'd have Bill talk about the coding part.
Yeah, the coding part. So what we're working on right now with all the comments received, what we do is we read them all, and we've got some software to analyze that. We will then come back and share with the board the prevailing themes. But the comments will drive you crazy because one person will say one thing and the next person will say exactly the opposite. So what we look for are kind of the prevailing themes. If there's 4, 5, 6, 10 people all saying the same thing, we'll name that theme and then cut and paste verbatim the comments to support that. And those are very important to read and understand. They're usually more helpful, as you kind of indicated, with communications, though, as far as the board and determining what to do next. You really want to rely on your quantitative data because everybody responded to the questions, where the comments, they weren't required. So you don't want to put too much weighting on the comments, unless, of course, there's a lot of people are all saying the same thing.
And I agree with you. The advocacy, or not advocacy, but the information campaign is the next step. You know, as we develop a long-range facility plan using this data, we'll start to put together, you know, a plan as we move forward, and then making sure that the public is well informed of all of that information leading into a subsequent survey at some point in the spring. And so there's lots of opportunities to get out and see people, and whether that's at athletic events or music events or open houses or coffee shops, you know, as we approach the next survey, and certainly if we were to go to referendum, that would be part of the project to ensure that people have all the information they need to make a good decision.
Other questions from board members? I think one question I would have for you is the response rate is 16.4%. I'm sure some people are looking at that and going, that is a very low percentage. Could you talk a little bit about that being being okay, being too high, being low, could you tell us a little bit about that in comparison to some other surveys you've done? Yeah, so for a large district, that's probably right, right exactly where you should be. But back in, even looking back in 2007, 2012, this is quite a bit higher response rate. But probably the most important question is this representative, is this predictive? And the answer is yes. So if you went from 4,600 and doubled that, from a statistical standpoint, I would wager that you wouldn't move more than 1% one way or another. So really it begins to lock down. A lot of the surveys you see maybe in a USA Today, there might be 400 samples, and that's it, or 500. So when you get up north of 4,000, you can really have confidence in the data. It's very, very good. Thank you. Just give one more opportunity. Any other questions from board members?
Is the uniformity across subgroups typical or atypical?
Well, this is kind of a unique survey, but yes, it is. It was really surprising because usually, as you were kind of indicating, the staff would be maybe a little more knowledgeable, or the most knowledgeable. Parents would be second most knowledgeable. Non-parents wouldn't know. But in this case, holy cow, there's really strong, and I'm not exactly sure why, but there is. So there's certainly a group who aren't crazy about some of these ideas, and there's certainly a majority of all the subgroups who are supporting it. And it might be you know, how long this person's lived in the district potentially, but that was very unique.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Operational Expectation Monitoring Report OE4, Personnel Administration. I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
All right, so monitoring is the heart of what we do through coherent governance. And I will warn the folks in the audience, it's a little more dry from here, so we understand if you want to take off and do other things, it's perfectly acceptable. But this report is Personnel Administrative Monitoring. We have our Director of Human Resources here, Matt Wenthe, and I think it's great information, so you should stick around for that.
I think that's the worst intro I've ever had. I'm laughing.
With that, I'll turn it over to Matt to go through OE4.
All right. You should have a report in front of you. We did make a couple minor adjustments here this afternoon just to correct and clarify some dates and some other information. I'm going to read parts of this here. As far as the summary, this is a summary of compliance status for OE4. The monitoring report, OE4, Personal Administration, is in compliance with school board expectations as set forth in the 15 operation expectations in the policy with regard to the time frame from development and first approval of the policy through November of 2020. Most of the operational expectation report should be 2020-21 school year, last school year. Two of the measures, OE4-2 and OE4-5, are in progress with data reporting that will be available for the first time at the end of the school year and each year thereafter. The other 13 operational expectations were monitored and reported with relevant data. The HR department, in conjunction with the superintendent, is primarily responsible for OE4, but relies on the support a wide variety of members of the administrative team and others provide, particularly in the area of hiring qualified and diverse staff members, supporting staff with professional development and evaluations that measure their contribution in achieving the board ends policy, and documenting needed information and reports. The OE4 monitoring report demonstrates that expected human resources, practices, and procedures are in place. Highlights would include well-compensated and stable employees who are evaluated on schedule and no formal complaints or grievances filed in the 2020-21 school year. Areas of growth would include the need to make continued progress toward matching the diversity in our community with our workforce and a compliance area with respect to staff training. Future modifications to measures and indicators for school board considerations are being considered as the OE4 monitoring report evolves. OE4 states that the superintendent shall ensure the recruitment, employment, development, evaluation, treatment, and compensation of district employees in a manner necessary to enable the district to achieve its results policies. And I'm going to go into each of the 15 areas. OE 4.1 says that the superintendent will ensure that no person is employed by the district without first clearing through background inquiries and checks. And our indicator says that 100%, we are in compliance, 100% of regular employees hired to begin employment during the previous school year cleared all background checks prior to board approval of their hire. And you can click on the link there that shows the comparison background check spreadsheet. We use BIB, which is one of the most popular ones, Background Investigative Bureau. OE 4.2, and by the way, feel free to, if you have questions, jump in and I'll gladly answer what I can. OE 4.2 says the superintendent will ensure that no volunteer has unsupervised contact with students without first clearing reasonable background inquiries and checks. Once again, BIB is our source for doing that. And as you can see in the indicators, 100% of volunteer applicants submitted to HR for approval during the previous school year have been screened using reasonable background checks and successfully cleared before approved volunteer. And once again, you can click on the evidence there. The evidence is from the principals verifying that they have submitted all of those. .3 states that the superintendent will aggressively recruit, select, and retain a highly qualified and diverse staff for all positions. Under OE 4.3, there are several indicators. The first one is that 100% of certified staff and support staff required to have a license are highly qualified as defined by the DPI. This is one that we did make a change today just to clarify. The documentation letter originally showed the audit report. The audit report that we had, this would have been this past summer, showed that there were 40 errors. 36 of those errors were cleared up. There were 4 people that did not have license. So really, it's not, if you saw the original report, it was said 36 out of 40. Well, we have far more than that, obviously. In fact, we have 781 employees requiring licensing. We are at 99.5 compliance with DPI required licensing. We were not compliant, those 4 people, at the time of the audit. 3 of them were pending. They had missed the deadline and they had submitted, so they were pending. All 3 of those have since cleared. The other person, there was there was some paperwork missing for a past background investigation. That has been cleared up as well, and that person is also cleared as far as now. But those 4 were not cleared at the time of the audit, and that's something we'll continue to work on. The second indicator, the annually calculated non-retirement teacher turnover rate will not exceed 8%. If you look at the link there, the attached OE 4.3 compliance documentation letter indicates 34 of 624 teachers resigned during the 2021 school year, which equals 5.5%, which is below the 8% threshold. Indicator 3, racial diversity will continue to increase from a baseline of 5.7 in the 2019-2020 school year toward the desired intermediate goal of 10%. And our evidence shows that racial diversity of the regular employees in the district as of October 21 is 6.2%. 64 out of 1,030 employees are racially diverse, as indicated on the October 1 EEOC report. And 9 of 112 new employees hired between March and November for the 21-22 school year are racially diverse at 8%. 4.4 states that the superintendent will ensure that all staff members are qualified and are provided mentoring and training to perform the responsibilities assigned to them. Indicator 1 shows that 100% of new teachers new to the district in the previous school year will participate in this district's Year 1 new teacher induction program and will be assigned a mentor. And 14 of 14 teachers hired last year participated in that. Indicator 2 says that 100% of regular special ed staff hired by March 1st of the previous school year will be certified in crisis prevention techniques. We did not comply with that. We had 10 of 11, 91% of our special ed staff hired during the 2021 school year completed Canvas training. I talked to the director on that. That 11th person took a different job before they had the training, so that person was only in the district for a very short amount of time. OE 4.5 says the superintendent will maintain an organizational culture that positively impacts the ability of staff to responsibly perform their jobs and allows them to work in an environment of professional support and courtesy. The indicator is an annual building district employee school culture survey will include the content indicated in the interpretation above. 54 employees completed the new employee survey for the 2021 school year, and the results are available on that link, including comments. 4.6 states that the superintendent will administer clear personnel rules and procedures for employees, including, but not limited to, procedures for reduction in force, staff ethics, conflicts of interest, and expected conduct of staff. The two indicators for that one, the first one says 100% of regular employees will complete the annual Fall Safe Schools module that includes district personnel policies. We fell short on this one. The Safe Schools report indicated that 95.4% of non-leave of absence and non-FMLA regular staff have completed the training. 47 of 1,030 employees had not completed 100% of the training. When we dug into that, what we found is that many of that 47, many had done part, but not necessarily all. Some had started in the district and did not stay in the district long enough to complete that. And some people just hadn't done it, and some had technical issues. And that will be something the safety director in Building and Grounds and I have talked about, trying to ensure that we can improve upon that percentage. OE 4.7, the superintendent will effectively handle employee complaints and concerns. Under 4.7, the indicator is 100% of formal written employee complaints or grievances are resolved or handled in accordance with district policy and related employee handbook policies. And what we have is that we have no written employee complaints or grievances during that school year, which is true for indicator 2 as well. Due process was ensured for 100% employees registering a formal personnel or complaint of grievance. That's going to be a recurring piece of evidence here. 4.8 will maintain adequate job descriptions for all staff positions. And the indicator is 100% of job descriptions will be available to employees and for use by administrators during the hiring and evaluation processes. And our evidence is that 100% of the job descriptions are posted and linked through the staff portal and Google Drive for employees. 4.9 states that the superintendent will protect confidential employee information. The indicator is no formal written report of a breach of confidential employee information is received. And also indicator 2, should a formal written report of breach of confidential employee information be received, 100% of the reports are investigated and appropriate action is taken. There were no formal written reports over the last school year. OE 4.10, the superintendent will ensure that the compensation and benefits plans attract and retain high-quality employees by compensating employees within available resources in a manner consistent with the applicable marketplace, including but not limited to organizations of comparable size and type. And our indicator is less than 10% of employees leaving the district indicate that pay and or benefits was the reason they left the district. Our evidence is the annual employee exit survey for the 2021 school year indicated that existing employees identified the reason for leaving for better pay was at 6.86% and dissatisfied with benefits was at 0.98% for a grand total of 7.84%. Second indicator is that La Crosse will rank in the upper 20% of CESA 4 districts and upper 50% of statewide comparable districts base and highest teacher salary, base teacher assistant, base administrative assistant pay, and custodial base pay, and we were compliant with that as well. The evidence being 2021 CESA 4 wage survey indicates that the school district of La Crosse ranked 1 or 2 of the approximately 20 school districts reporting in the CESA 4. And the DPI 2020-21 teacher salary data indicates that the school district of La Crosse teachers were above the average salary of statewide school employees. OE 4.11 states that the superintendent will, consistent with the superintendent's own evaluation, evaluate all employee performances according to their contribution toward achieving the board's results policies and their compliance with the board operational expectations policies. Indicator 1 shows that 95% of teachers due for summary evaluation in the previous school year are evaluated on cycle. The attached OE4 compliance documentation letter indicates 243 out of 250 teachers due for summary evaluation were evaluated on cycle during the last school year, which is 97.2. Reasons that they may not be. The model is really meant as a growth model, and if we have teachers who are retiring and announce their retirement early, we often say that as a growth model, there's no reason that we would need to continue that process for that final year. Teachers and administrators, second indicator, teachers and administrators will be rated as proficient or distinguished 75% of the time on the selected components comprising their summary evaluation. And the evidence is that the summary of the educator effectiveness component scores held at 92.8% of administrators' components scores and 96% of teacher component scores were rated as proficient or distinguished. 4.12 says the superintendent will reasonably include personnel in decisions that affect them. And as far as indicators, you can see the superintendent and or team will meet regularly with employee groups, and the evidence was regular meetings were scheduled with the 5 represented employee groups, and you can see examples of those dates for those meetings. Joint leadership would be the teacher group. 4.13 says the superintendent may not retaliate against any employee for initiating a legitimate complaint based upon an alleged violation of board governing policy. The evidence of that, 100% of formal written employee complaints reported to the office of the superintendent are investigated without retaliation toward the reporting employee. And once again, there were no formal written complaints regarding any retaliation received during the last school year. 4.14, the superintendent may not promise or guarantee permanent employment to any individual. And once again, 0% of candidates or employees will be guaranteed permanent employment in the district. The compliance documentation letter states that there were no reports of non-standard hiring or guaranteed permanent offers of employment during the past school year. And finally, 4.15 says the superintendent may not change their own compensation. The indicator is that the board will annually set the compensation of the superintendent, which will be reported to the HR and payroll departments, and the attached compliance documentation letter indicates that Superintendent Aaron Engel has been compared to payroll records, and Superintendent Engel is being paid at the correct contracted rate. Questions?
Questions from the board members?
I have two things. Just, in your first executive summary, in paragraph 3, you have no formal complaints or grievances filed in the 2019-2020.
It should be, that was correct.
You said, yes. Okay.
Yes, that should be 2021.
You read it correctly, it was just wrong on our screen.
And that then, was a late edit.
That's all right. And then on 4.12, it was talked about that staff would be included in, let me get the exact wording here, reasonably include personnel in decisions that affect them. As you may or may not know, we had a linkage today and with one of the schools, and the new strategic abandonment, they're kind of feeling like decisions are being made without their input. There's some assessments that they use that have been taken away. There's some time that they feel is important that has been taken away. So I think we want to just make sure that we keep those connections to the schools, especially with all of the chaos that's happening, and all good-hearted trying to help, but sometimes the best intentions can have the worst consequences.
Absolutely. We had a number of principals talk to their staffs to kind of get a sense as to which of those things would be best received. We talked to our joint leadership group in the union as well, so we certainly talked to a number of teachers in the development of those ideas. And as it relates to assessments, nothing was taken away. They just have an option whether or not to use them. So for teachers that are using those to drive their instruction or learn more about those kids, all those assessments are still available to them.
And as you know, one person may say one thing, and so it's a very individualized.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we do well in this school district is our communication with staff, involving people in the decisions that affect them. You know, we're talking about compensation and benefits, and we've got representatives from those groups at the table helping craft ideas. And so, but that said, we can always get better and ensure that people are heard. And it doesn't matter if we think they are, it matters if they think they are. Exactly. Absolutely. So thank you for those comments.
You're welcome.
I would go along with that too. I mean, you meet with employee groups, but I'm wondering about meeting with each school's staff throughout the year. I don't know if you've been in each school to meet with all of the teachers.
I have not, but I know that our directors of elementary and secondary education are in front of all of our teachers on a regular basis. Our principals are a conduit for all of that information, and we have staff meetings on a regular basis. We're too large an organization for me to effectively go out there and talk to them all, but you know, we've got a process for gathering that information up, and on occasion we'll put out surveys, you know, to directly solicit employee input as well. Yeah, there's always opportunities for improve though, and those are good thoughts.
Other questions from the board?
I just have a comment. I really appreciate on those indicators where there were exceptions noted that you dug into those and were able to provide information to the board to help us better understand that. I think that's a model for all of these reports. So yes. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very nice.
Any other comments?
Yeah, we want to bat 100%, but if we don't, we also want to make sure that we're transparent and then figure out how we're going to fix it. So.
Well, of course, the understanding is that it's impossible to do that at all times, so being able to note those are very important for the board to help us make a decision about compliance, so it's appreciated.
So as a board, just taking a straw poll here, are we feeling comfortable with the recommendations that were made? I don't see any concerns. So, okay. Then I feel great. Thank you, Mr. Wenthe. Appreciate it. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda, the Results Monitoring Report, R2.2, Academic Performance. Dr. Engel?
Yeah, so monitoring is the heart of what we do in coherent governance. And remember, this results policies, we're splitting out over time. They're lengthy ones, and there's also information that comes about at different times of the year, and we want to make sure it's timely, and we're getting you that information when it's most pertinent to you. We'd hate to cover assessment data 6 months after it's released by the state and for you to feel out of the loop on that. And so that's why these reports are kind of chunked up throughout the year. And this coincides with R2 as a whole. So we'll talk about 2.2 specifically and the details there, but then we'll also look at R2 as a whole, which will be hopefully relatively brief, as you've already seen all that information at this point. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lahaki.
Thank you. I do have a nightmare that I'm experiencing right now, and that was to have to present on the same night that Bill Foster from School Perceptions is here. So bear with me. Our results policy 2.2, apply critical thinking and problem-solving skills. The approach for this was to look at our standardized assessed data and break it down into critical thinking and problem solving. To do that, we look at Webb's research on depth of knowledge. So just a quick overview of what depth of knowledge would be. There are 4 levels. Level 1, I call it the Siri level, meaning that you can ask Siri a question, it'll give you a direct answer, a list, calculation, what's the capital of something. Those are level 1, and they're the building blocks for the other depths of level of knowledge. Depth of knowledge level 2 is by far the most popular depth of knowledge question that shows up on a standardized assessment. It's a compare and contrast, predict. Those are the kinds of actions that take place. That wasn't the criteria for this particular board report. When we think about critical thinking and problem solving, that's at least depth of knowledge 3. And so the approach for ELA math was the same, was to look specifically at the percent correct that students had with the depth of knowledge 3 questions, and that's what I'm reporting on tonight. For English language learner, and this is a little different. This is, I think, the only results policy between R2 and R3 where I'm actually reporting on percent correct. Normally I do proficient and advanced data, so I want to make sure I highlight that this is a little bit different data. Unfortunately, this isn't published at the state level in any way, so I cannot compare La Crosse to state for depth of knowledge 3. And really, I don't have the historical data that I'm trying to provide in many instances, because it was just recently that the state provides data that can be broken down in this particular way. So I could only go back to 2018 and 19 for this information. So you can see for the depth of knowledge for ELA, relatively stagnant from 2018 to 2020, last year's assessment. And of course, in 2019-20, the state assessments were canceled, so there's that gap year that you'll see prevalent. It's broken down by different grade levels as well. Our 2.2, I don't have the opportunity to kind of go back in time and go back to 2.1 and add some of that longitudinal data that the board requested the last time I presented. So what I did is I put some of the longitudinal data for ELA in this report as new information, but know that this is likely going to move back to where it belongs in 2.1. But based on the request from last time, I thought this is an opportunity to put that data in front of you. I have to tell you, I'm a table guy, because when you look at numbers don't lie. You can't manipulate numbers. And so if you look at our state performance in 2016 to 17, and then compare it to 2020 and 21, those are just numbers. When it turns into a visual, that's where things can get manipulated a little bit, and I want to make sure that I'm being transparent when you look at the visual aspect of it to make sure you know what you're looking at. The first thing I would notice is a trend line. So if you go back from 2016, you compare to 2020, if it's going up, that's good, right? That means that we are either closing gaps or increasing proficiencies in comparison to the state, which I believe is the best way to look at this data, because year to year there's going to be test variations, but a state comparison is an apples to apples type experience. The second thing I would notice is where is the 0 on the vertical axis? So in math, we call it the y-axis, right? Remember back to those days? So if you look at the y-axis on the left-hand side of each of the graphs, where is the 0 and where's the column? If we're going up, if the numbers are below that 0, that means that La Crosse scores above the state average for whatever chart you're looking at. If it's a negative, that means that there's a gap between the school district of La Crosse performance and what the state indicates. The third potential misleading aspect of these charts is the scale. And so you can really manipulate graphs by changing the scale. And when you look closely, you'll see, for example, for the ELA, what do we look at here? So the overall, you can see that we have a scale where it's -1, -2, -3, -4, right? And in the graph, the trend line's going up. That means we're closing the gap compared to the state, compared to 2016 and 17. But if you look, that same kind of trend line almost shows up when you're looking at students who identify as Asian. You can see that the scale looks a little bit different there. So that's the third thing to look at. That's an interval scale of 5. It's really challenging. You have to make a choice here. I could have it look the same, but then you would get a 70-page report because it would be spaced out more. So by condensing the tables, I get all the reference groups on one chart. So I'm not sure what to do with that. I'm hopeful that if I can just explain that if you look for the 0, you look for the scale, and you look for the trend line, those 3 areas would help understand what the data is that you're looking at. If that is not the right way, I'm open to feedback for that. But as you can see, from 2016 to 17 to 2020, 21, and you look at just about every reference group, you can see our trend lines are going up, meaning that we are closing gaps between the state, or it could be performance by a particular reference group for ELA. In mathematics, we look back to DOK 3, items answered correctly again. You can see that we're below where we were in 2018-19, so we were having some pandemic learning to continue this year. And then when you look at the overall trend lines, once again, in the math one, you will see almost everyone is up. Well, the majority are closing gaps, not every single one. I will have to notice that students who identify as Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, that's always going to show up as a huge gap because we don't have enough sample size in our district. So it just looks like we have a 0, right? So one of the things I'd look for feedback is, do you still want me to include that group when we don't have a sample size that qualifies? Or if I should pull that group out of the reports? The third graph that I want to show you, this is where it gets challenging again. It's because before I was talking about percent correct for depth of knowledge. Now I'm going back to all the other reports that I've done, and it's the percent that are proficient and advanced. And the approach was to look at our standardized tests for science, specifically for a category related to critical thinking and problem solving. So on the Wisconsin Forward, we're looking at making sense of phenomenon within a scenario. That's the closest match that I can report on. But once again, that data isn't reported by the state level. I can just give you a comparison of 2016, 17, et cetera, to 2021. In science, we actually take 3 different assessments as part of our Wisconsin student assessment system. So for 9th and 10th, it is our ACT Aspire. And once again, not a state comparison, but I can break down that particular category. And the category for the ACT Aspire changes a little bit, same as the ACT 11th grade. It's scientific investigation, evaluation of models, inferences, and experimental results is the category. So you might look, like when you look at the overall science, you might have noticed, hey, there's some differences in proficiencies. Well, that's correct, because this is one category of the overall. The chart that's included once again, has that overall broken down over the 5 years. And if you look at that trend line again, you can see in just about every situation, we are closing the gaps, whether it be reference groups or state, pretty substantially in the area of science. The no data, that's that Hawaiian and Pacific Islander chart. All right. I know I threw a couple different curveballs at you, but I wanted to get the 5-year data in front of you, and this was an opportunity to do so. Keep that in mind as we then transition to the next report, R2, because I'll reference back to that 5-year report. Are there any questions about R2?
Questions from the board members?
Yes, I have one.
Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, so because these are looking at increase over prior year, how does the state, how we do compared to the state, like play into our own personal students' increase over the prior year? Like in deciding about that, like reasonable progress.
Sure. So reasonable progress, and when we get to R2, it's marked as making reasonable progress, meaning that it's not a magical situation where all of a sudden you're below the state average and then you are above. Instead, we're seeing incremental growth, meaning that you're reasonably progressing towards being above the state average, was the approach the administration took. The goal is written as a line in the sand, but the terminology reasonable progress means we are working towards that, or in some cases we may already be above that, and we'll continue to want to see growth above where we were previously. That trend line, I think, is an important aspect of determining reasonable progress or not.
So I guess one of the things that I struggle with a little bit is like, if we look at some of those indicators in this 2.2 is, like, I understand the argument of like, you know, comparing ourselves against the state. You can have declining, you know, proficiency if the state's declining too, if you're closing, but I understand that that's a goal. With these ones where we're looking at the increase over prior year, like in the math one, for example, the declines seem more pronounced. I guess it's hard for me to wrap my head around how, in the additional information, sorry, trying to find my place. We have, just get this a little bigger. We saw great growth, 2016, 2017, 36.9, then up to 38.8, then up to 39, then COVID dropped down to 27.5. So when I was just trying to frame this in my head and thinking about reasonable progress towards increasing over the prior year, when we have that local improvement and then a drop, I think it's like, I'm just trying to understand like how our comparison to the state like matters in this one. Like 2.1, I get it. 2.2, I'm kind of like, increase means get better. We were getting better, and now we've dropped.
There's another example of where this has happened in recent history in Wisconsin. And so this is a case of a pandemic kind of messing with everybody at the same time. And so that comparison to the state is helpful for us in understanding kind of relative to the average what happened. The other time this happened was when they implemented the Badger exam, the Badger test. So we went from the WKCE to the Badger test to the forward exam. And the cut scores, the type of test that was given was vastly different for the Badger exam than for the other two tests. And so we saw reading proficiency and math proficiency jump up substantially on that test because it assessed kids differently. And so it wouldn't have been right for us to claim credit for that improvement. Like, we didn't all of a sudden improve proficiency in math by 20%. They changed the test on us. They changed the cut scores, how they evaluate that. But we could still use the difference between the state in terms of, are we making progress on that exam relative to the prior year? So if we had been within 5 points of the state last year and we were still within 5 points this year, we would know that we had done about the same, even though we saw a significant change. I think it's similar to this year with these declining scores. There's a bit of a handicap because of the pandemic. I would say that, for this one in particular, our 2.2, we said it would increase over the prior year. We don't have a comparison to the state. We're basically asking for some grace that it didn't go down a lot. We, just like with our generalized math scores, we would expect those scores to go down some because of the pandemic. The same for these depth of knowledge 3 questions. And we don't really have a benchmark for how the state does because that data is not reported to us. One way to address that would be to just indicate we don't have evidence this year, or, to be, take it at face value and say, no, we didn't meet that progress. But I agree it does create a conundrum for the board members who are evaluating this. How do you want to approach that? What's reasonable progress in the midst of a pandemic on something that we can't compare to some outside standard? Dr. LaHuck, if you wanted to add?
That was well said. I think the comparison to state is the best we can typically do. And if we don't have that option, then it's year-to-year growth, which is the approach we took as well, or decline in this particular instance. So the decision is the pandemic partially responsible for the decline? If so, did we still make reasonable progress despite the pandemic?
We would say we did from an administrative perspective, or at least are asking for a 1-year pass.
Well, right, because when you look at all the measures that I brought forward, the decline compared to the rest of the state has been less.
And it's going to throw off next year's data too, right? So we're gonna have non-comparable to state data next year. If we've done our job as well as we think we are, those numbers should go up, and we're going to do better than last year. But really, we should probably be comparing to 2 years ago because, this last year was an unfair comparison, So it's going to be a judgment call by board members for a while on this data. And there'll be a test change at some point. They'll come up with something new, and for years there will be a judgment call by board members. I think that reasonable progress thing is really like the reasonable person standard for, the law. If you talk to your friends, what would they say? If you talk to people on the street, what was a reasonable person, come up with here? What do you think as a board member, most importantly?
One of the things I think might be helpful, I think particularly because this isn't just, as you pointed out, an issue this year, but in the coming years as well. And because these reports are part of our official record, right? It might be helpful just to have some kind of notation that's attached to it, just even for a historical record to be part of this as well. I'm not talking about a major report here by any means, but just that speaks to essentially what you just described. Also, just for future board members and the public might be helpful.
Yeah, and the overall, R2, there'd be an opportunity for the board to put in some context and rationalize how you thought about this, and maybe you chose reasonable progress, but you want to just let folks know, hey, these were the things we were thinking about.
Yeah.
And, it's a weird year, and you should know this forever after.
Right. That's yes.
Yes, right. And I think that would be a good place to do that would be in the board summary statement, right, which would be on the cover page. Correct. Any other comments or questions on R 2.2 before we move on to the full R2? Hearing none, then let us move on then to the full results monitoring report, R2 academic performance, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
So this is, like I described briefly, the full R2 coming back for full approval. The board has already made a decision on each of the subcomponents, so we're not going to belabor the report and go back through it all. We don't want to waste your time. But if there's anything that jumps out to you or you want to revisit, we are happy to take that on. And I don't know, Dr. LaHuck, if you have anything specific to add for this.
I would like to go through each item one by I would say that I tried to capture the essence of the data fragility that we're experiencing right now within the executive summary, in that we did not have that tested year in 1920, and just the understanding that even our assessments last year were taken after we had come back to school face to face after about a month. then all of a sudden we assessed our kids in this particular way. So there's a lot to digest when it comes to looking at this data, a lot of stories you can tell. So the executive summary tries to capture that. But yes, each one of these has been brought forward. December 20th will be proposed changes to R2. So, any feedback you had related to that as well, this would be a good opportunity for me to have a few days to get something ready.
So any comments from the board members on R2 as a whole? I think the only question I would have is to the board. In terms of the conversation we just had on R2.2, I'm going to assume, and I know what happens when I do that, but I'm going to assume that the board would like to have some sort of summary statement written there. So maybe Ms. Bauman, you and I could partner together on creating some sort of draft that we could then pass along to the board to see if that would be something we could write up and present, and then that would be there for us to vote on. None. Then we will move on to our announcements. So I will turn it over to Ms. Bauman, announcements about the La Crosse Public Education Foundation.
Sure, let me just find my notes, clear my throat a little. So I'll just repeat again, on January 14th is the awards luncheon. It's currently scheduled to be in person, but there is some investigation about what that will look like if possible. I also want to mention that with the Bow Tie Classic, we raised $38,860, which is pretty significant. And another interesting piece, the staff appeal that went over the goal of $41,000. So even in the midst of COVID and feeling this immense stress and pressure, staff are believing in our students and the mission of the schools. I think that was really cool. On the 7th, tomorrow, the Gold Star Grant package get delivered. So watch the news for all of the amazing things that our teachers are doing. And then just another update on the executive director. The ad is reposted and the search continues. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. For my announcements, I was remiss. Dr. Lahaki, thank you very much for the presentations on R2 and R2.2. I apologize that I did not say that beforehand. We had a linkage today with Hamilton Elementary, and we have 3 more coming up before the holiday break. So if board members are able on December 13th. Oh, that's right, not the 8th, I apologize. The 8th, we have Logan Middle. Thank you for reminding me, Ms. Como. The 8th, we have Logan Middle. The 13th, we have Spence Elementary. On the 15th, we have La Crosse Polytechnic. And on the 20th, we have State Road Elementary. So looking forward to hearing from the staff at those times. So if you can make it, that would be fantastic. Let Ms. Stagerwald know that you can make it.
Data for us, and we will digest that and modify our plan to suit. In addition, it's not ESSER 3 funds. Patty, we got Ms. Sprang, we got a allocation of funds from Governor Evers. Do you know what that's called?
Yeah, it's like state coronavirus aid, and it's based on the per pupil. So I think it was like $134 a pupil, which generated about $822,500 for the school district of La Crosse. So it's so new, we don't even have an accounting code to put it in our books. So we're waiting for DPI to give us that.
Those funds don't fall under ESSER, they're separate. We don't believe they come with restrictions, but they might end up, because it's like Ms. Sprang said, it's so new. So we're still kind of in a holding pattern with those funds to kind of understand what they can and cannot be used for. Once again, those are one-time funds. It's not a recurring funding source. So when we use this money, it's gone. So if you hire a person with those funds, you may have to lay them off in the future. So that's something to keep in mind with these one-time funds. We greatly appreciate them. They're incredibly useful for us and and helping students in our school district. But they are one-time funds, and it does limit what we can do with them. But we'll be putting our heads together to come up with a plan, and we'll share that with the school board in the near future. Anything else you'd like to add on that, Ms. Spring?
No, not at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us move on to agenda planning.
I'll make a motion to approve the December 20th, 2021 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Second.
There's a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Como to approve the December 20, 2021 Board of Education agenda, with any additions or corrections. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion has carried, and we'll move on to board debriefing. I'll turn it over to Dr. Cooper-Stoll.
Thank you, Dr. Jimenez. So I'm going to utilize the questions in our debriefing questions for the evening. What did the board do well tonight? I thought there were a lot of really good questions that helped us digest many of the reports that we went through, and I appreciated hearing that feedback from multiple board members. Of course, I think we always do well when we hear as many perspectives around the table as we possibly can in questions. I didn't identify anything that didn't work well for us as far as our agenda goes this evening. And I would just open it up if there are any items that board members would like to improve on for board performance going forward. If there's feedback from board members tonight.
Any feedback from the board? Hearing none. Thank you, Dr. Cooper-Stoll.
Thank you, Dr. Menace.
With that, we are adjourned.